There's another question in the back.
Hi. I'm curious about a couple of things really quickly, but I just want to preface the comment by saying that noir isn't really like the main area of my own film inquiry, but it just seems to be the 900-pound gorilla that you keep bumping into. It just feels really large to me, and it intersects a lot of different areas, as you said. So with that, I'm curious about a couple of things. Sort of the idea that, one, that noir is alive and breathing. Currently, for instance, so be nice, because I'm, not really deeply into this area at all, but for instance, a movie like Brick.
I love Brick.
Oh, well, good, because
yeah.
I was so impressed by that, and the fact, is this still an alive, breathing art form that's valid? Okay, and the other one, this is going to be probably just the less sort of, you say you're not making popular comments about the third man. Well, here goes with this. Sort of the last thing I was looking at, the last critical piece was about, I am interested in representation of women in film. And the last critical piece I was looking at was about sort of the origin of femme fatales and the idea, sort of the general, not always, but the general sort of treatment of women in noir. And there was just this big thing about, that, oh, gee, it's actually a mechanism of social control. It reinstates a gender status quo. These women are not exactly housefraus, and in the end, they get their comeuppance. And I was just like, oh my God, here was just like this, simple sort of, detective, quirky sort of thing. And it's like, oh no, here's all this stuff going on. And it's like, I mean, is that possible? Is there a social, sort of nefarious social analysis here that works like really badly? Yeah, the social analysis that it's a mechanism of control, that it reinstates the status quo. I mean, not every time, but very, very often in its treatment of, sort of transgressive, uppity chicks who aren't behaving like housefraus.
There's something to that. But I don't think that it's as nefarious as any sort of organized effort. I would say, in fact, it's simply a reflection of post-war anxieties about masculinity. People came back from the war and found a very different world. And I think that the world that men had known before the war had deteriorated. The same opportunities weren't necessarily available to them. A lot of women had found work in the interim, in their absence, and weren't necessarily dependent on their husbands in the same way. And there were a lot of anxieties around a lack of male power and an increase in female power within culture. And so I think that part of the reason that the femme fatale became such a powerful motif in film was because she embodied and expressed some of those anxieties. But the other problem with that argument is that it ignores the variety of femme fatale. There were femme fatale like Anne Savage's character in Detour, who is just a snarling, nasty woman from beginning to end, who was absolutely in control of the situation. And it was only by a fluke of a phone cord that relationship turned. Otherwise, there's every reason to believe that she would have been utterly in control of that situation. There were femme fatale like Kathy Moffat, Jane Greer's character in Out of the Past, who were deceitful, who were manipulative, smooth as silk, and yet, when the lies finally came unraveled, could quickly pull a gun. And so they kind of had all the tricks. They had sex appeal, they had intelligence, they had great rhetoric, and they had a pistol. So, I think that there are so many different varieties, so many different takes. There was Ava Gardner's femme fatale in The Killers, who really is just sex appeal. There's not a ton of depth to Kitty in that film. But what she has is enough. As the one character says to the Swede, stop listening to those golden harps, as he kind of unfurls the handkerchief that she gave him with the golden harps on it. So I think that to say that it was sort of a mechanism of social control assumes a master plan that was absent. I think it's more a reflection of anxieties, a collection of anxieties. The first question is noir alive and well? Yes and no. I actually am of the opinion that noir was alive and well very recently, and that you can look at a couple of things. You can look at the films that were getting greenlit from the late 90s through the early part of this millennium, and you can look at the resurgence in hard-boiled, mid-century styled, throwback hard-boiled literature that was happening in the early 2000s, where for a couple of years the Edgar and the Anthony award lists were dominated by Megan Abbott, Alan Guthrie, Charles R. Dye, Ken Bruin, these writers who either actually write throwback set in the mid-century, pure throwback, and if you've not read Megan Abbott, and if you've not read Krista Faust, read them. Megan Abbott's Queen Pin is one of the most perfect books I've read, and she's going to be here to introduce the next film.
3 weeks.
3 weeks,
Yeah.
Which is the next film, though, in the noir series.
No, we
right?
have every Thursday we're here.
Oh, okay.
We can come back.
Misspoke, but in 3 weeks. And I think, actually, that that anxiety has started to fade. As a culture, I think we can only stay in a state of panic for so long, despite all of our best attempts, and maybe there is something nefarious here. I think there is every time I go through the airport and we're still on orange alert, and you hear orange alert all the time. You know, we can never just say yellow. We're not a culture that can say yellow. We have to be somewhere a little more panicked than yellow, or green, or whatever is the lowest scale that we've never heard, right? Is it green? It's probably green. I don't know. I've never heard it. It's always been orange or red. And there was this great window post 9/11 where there was a sudden resurgence of noir in filmmaking and hard-boiled in literature in this mid-century tradition, because it was tapping into the exact same anxieties. And I feel like that window is closed. I've not been able to get the mentioned book published. I got an agent in New York who's done a great job of marketing it. And in each case, the feedback was the same, which is mid-century throwback doesn't sell. Even the people who are getting these awards, you know, it's not the kind of numbers that modern publishers are interested in. And we're suddenly not seeing as much of that. But what a glorious few years we had. You know, we had these great books. We had the Coen brothers, The Man Who Wasn't There, Miller's Crossing, and The Big Lebowski, which was their trilogy tribute to, respectively, The Man Who Wasn't There was their take on Kane. The Big Lebowski was their remake of The Big Sleep, if you can believe it. And the Miller's Crossing was their take on Hammett. You had Brick, which we were talking about just last night. We were sort of quizzing each other on favorites and movie lists and, you know, top 5. Well, that's an impossible question. I would go on for months and say, oh, wait, no, I need to substitute that for this. But my question was, okay, favorite debut film by a director? And I said Brick. That is a really inventive film. If you're not familiar with it, it came out in 2004 or 5. And we were lucky enough to actually talk to Rian Johnson on the podcast. We just sent him an email, and he said, sure, I'll talk to you guys, and gave us an hour. And the book is actually written exactly like a Dashiell Hammett, you know, it's Dashiell Hammett dialogue. It's late 30s style dialogue in the mouths of Los Angeles teenagers in a modern high school. And in the hands of a lesser director, it would have been so jarring it would have just seemed silly. And in his hands, that kind of stylized gangster speech makes perfect sense, because it's just like the stylized outsider speech that's adapted by teenagers. You know, the idea is that these criminals adopted their own sort of code that fit their world, and that's not so different from what teenagers adopt to fit their world and to kind of to signal their own outsider status. Brilliant film. I love that movie.